We continue the Shi'ur in Gemara. The Gemara says that a person sitting at a table and having someone serve at the table at a meal, at a banquet, there is a man serving this banquet. Naturally, the person serving is tempted by the foods that he brings to the table. It's very unhealthy for a person to see food in front of his eyes and have his mouth drool and not be able to taste of that food. In fact, the Gemara says that that's actually poison. It can cause a very serious illness to that person. The Gemara says there was one rabbi two rabbis, one of them offered his servant a little of every food or every course that was brought before him, so that the servant should have something to eat. He shouldn't look at it and be so tempted. The other rabbi, knowing that it's unhealthy for the servant not to eat when he's serving, he offered him one of the courses to eat while serving. The difference is that in one case the servant felt much better. In the second case he was satisfied, but not that much. How much difference is this in the degree of mitzvah? Now, the Gemara tells us that Eliyahu Hanavi came down from heaven to study Torah with the rabbis of the Gemara, with many of them. He appeared before some saw him, some didn't, but there were certain ones, outstanding ones, who he came regularly to study Torah with them. The one who offered every course to his servant, Eliyahu Hanavi came to him and spoke to him openly, friendly. The other one, Eliyahu Hanavi, did not come to speak to him. So important was this item that Eliyahu Hanavi felt he could not deserve having him as a visitor. There are also two Chassidim, which means two great rabbis again, and one offered the servant food before he himself ate, and the other offered the servant food after he himself had eaten. Again, with the one who offered the food first, Eliyahu Hanavi spoke. The other one who offered it later, he refused to speak to him. This is a very important lesson. If a person has a poor servant or a maid, see to it that not to cause anguish to these who serve, and see that they are fed. Best thing is that they are fed first. If they do bring food to the table, they should be allowed to taste of that food. We'll have more on that topic later on. The Gemara discusses this more in detail. The Gemara says that Rav Ashi, Rav Zutra, and Rav Meimar, these three rabbis were sitting at the front of the gates of the palace of the king. The king's servant and his entourage were bringing a large tray of food for the king. As this is being brought by, Rav Ashi noticed that Mazutra's face was turning white, which means that he was being affected by the smell of this food. And when a person is affected that way, it's dangerous. So dangerous, in fact, that the Gemara says that even on Kippur, a person who's affected that way is allowed to eat to break Kippur. When Rav Ashi saw this, he put his finger onto the food tray, the food in that tray was meat, put his finger on that, got some of the taste on his finger, and he placed his finger in the mouth of Mazutra to appease him. When the servants of the king saw this, they became infuriated. They said to Rav Ashi, "You have spoiled the king's meal. The king cannot eat if somebody sticks his finger into the food. Why did you do this?" Now this, of course, could mean a death penalty, disrespect to the king. Rav Ashi saw that his life was in danger, so he said to the servants of the king, because this food is not fit for the king, one who does this, one who prepares this food, should not have the king eat it. the one who prepared this food is not fit to prepare for the king, and the king should not eat this food. They asked him why, what's wrong with it? So he said, I saw a leprosy germ there, an infection of leprosy, which means that the person who prepared the food is a leper. The servants examined the food carefully. These are speaking about, of course, the king's top servants, his officials. They examined it, and they found no trace of leprosy in that meat. This, of course, meant that the purpose of the examination was to accuse Rav Ashi in a treasonous act. They found no trace. They said to Rav Ashi, you are guilty. Rav Ashi said, wait. He took the finger of this cook who prepared the food. He pointed with the finger to a certain spot at the meat. And he said, did you examine that spot? And they said, no, let's look at it. They examined it, and they found a trace of leprosy there. So they thanked Rav Ashi saving the king's life, and he left. The rabbis asked Rav Ashi, how come that you took a chance? This was a miracle. There was no leprosy in that food. You took a risk of a false claim just because you wanted to help Mazutra. Because he was that hungry, you wanted to help him to save him from, that's a minor item. That, of course, he was in danger, his health was in danger because his face turned white. But that danger is very small compared to the danger you placed yourself in. His life was not jeopardized, whereas you were jeopardizing your own life. The Torah says that your life comes first, before your friend's life, especially since it wasn't even a question of his friend's life. So he said, it wasn't that I relied upon a miracle. I saw an aura of leprosy over this cook. And therefore, I was positive that in putting his finger there, we would find a bit of leprosy in the meat. I'm going to go back to this point again to describe this better. This point about a person who is tempted by food. And here, this is a medical fact. The Gemara tells us that when a person is tempted by food, what happens is that his mouth starts drooling. That's saliva that forms, and that saliva is poisonous. A person is tempted by food, and he swallows that saliva, that's actually swallowing poison. The Gemara tells us an actual case. There was a Roman, a goy, there's a story to illustrate this point, who wanted to marry a certain woman. And of course, she didn't want him. He didn't have the qualities necessary for her. He desired her very much. He kept on proposing to her, and she refused. So he went and brought the rich pomegranates. They were very juicy. He broke it open and started to eat in front of her. And as she saw him eating, her mouth began to drool, and she kept on swallowing his saliva. He refused to give her a piece of it, and she became very ill. She started her stomach began to blow up. Then he said to her, if I will cure you from this illness, will you marry me? And she said, yes. He took some more of this pomegranate. He started to eat it in front of her, and he told her, any saliva that comes to you, spit it out. Do this continually. She did it until the core of this disease, a long green stem, came out. She spit it out, and she was cured immediately. Now this Roman, of course, had knowledge of medicine, but it's a very, very vital lesson to know. This is in Shulchan too. The Rambam speaks about it, that a person should never swallow if he's tempted by a certain type of food, because it's very dangerous, unless he can eat that food or to expectorate at that time so he can be saved. The Gemara says that a person who sighs, groans, as many Chassidim do when they sully, in the middle of praying, when they come out with a loud oi, if that comes from the depth inside, and that breaks a person's body, it breaks him down, it weakens him, because it takes a lot out of him. And there's a very good reason for that. Arizal explains the reason for this sighing and groaning is that a person who is in the depth of sin has an invisible rope which ties him to the roots of this sin. In order to break away from that sin and instead to tie himself to the roots of Kedusha, of holiness, the only way to do it is by giving out that oi, that side. When he does that, he severs, cuts this rope, and attaches himself to Kedusha. And the Gemara tells us that there was a goy who knew about this, and when a Jew and a goy traveled together, in those days, probably nowadays too, they would want to do it. In those days, the goy would always seek to attack the Jew while they were on the road alone. Attacking would do him harm. This was a Jew who was strong. The goy was not that strong. He wanted to attack the Jew. So while going on the road together, the goy reminded the Jew about the Churban Bet HaMikdash. He spoke about it in a very pathetic tone. The Jew let out a deep sigh of suffering. Still, the goy tried to test the Jew's strength. He couldn't overcome him. The goy said to the Jew, "Don't you have a rule? Doesn't the Torah say that when a person sighs, it breaks him physically?" So the Jew answered, "That's true, but only when you sigh over something that's new. A new item of bad news, that could break a person. But something that's old, it's old news already, it doesn't break us down that much." As people say, a woman who's used to having her children pass away, she continually has miscarriages or children dying. So if another one goes, she doesn't have that same pain as one whose first child, Chas v'Shalom, is gone. To us, this is already a thing that we're so accustomed to, that when we sigh over it, we don't feel the real pain and suffering of the Churban Bet HaMikdash. Now the Gemara tells us a set of rules concerning the relations between husband and wife, concerning the duties that a wife has to her husband. It is generally known that when a person does something for someone, there is to be expected an appreciation, a degree of appreciation, recognition. When a man marries a woman, he takes her out of a category of an unmarried woman or a potential old maid and gives her a title, Mrs., which is the most coveted item in a woman's life. Every woman strives for that. The Gemara says clearly that much more than a man desires to be married, a woman desires to become a wife. And yet, women generally, the Gemara will discuss exceptional cases, women generally do not have that character, that goodness of character in showing appreciation. For this, or in general, women generally are the kind that are cold, and once they have obtained their goal, instead of showing appreciation, they will show the very opposite, because the difference between man and woman, and according to Kabbalah, is that man, again we speak generally, there are exceptions, generally a man is called chesed, kindness. A man, if he receives something good, will appreciate. A man will share goodness. A man will try to benefit others. A woman is called din, which means harshness. A woman cannot show any goodness. She does not contain this goodness that a man has. And a woman, when she is given good, will not show appreciation either. Therefore, this combination of marriage, whereby, when combining both, the man's goodness is supposed to overpower the woman's lack of goodness. Now, the Gemara says, what about, since a woman is married to a man, since he has taken her under his wing, what are her duties? What does she owe as a wife? The Gemara says the duties of a wife are, for one, she has to do the grinding, that is preparing the food. Nowadays, of course, we have groceries where you can buy it. And she has to do the cooking and the baking and the serving of the meals, making of the beds, and so on. In addition, she must also nurse a child. Now, if a woman is wealthy and offers to bring in, at her own expense, maids, then she is excused from most of these duties. But, the Gemara says, despite this, a woman, if she brings in 1,000 maids, is not to be left alone, not to be left idle, because idleness can destroy character. It can lead a woman to the worst items possible. A woman is not the kind that would sit down in the Bet Midrash and study Torah all day. If she has nothing at all to do, she's completely idle. Her cooking and shopping is taken care of, and the children are taken care of by nursemaids. She has nothing else to do. It will lead her to crime, or it will lead her to a point where her mind will become affected. She'll do wrong. Of course, in general, women's minds are lightheaded. The Gemara says that a woman is nashim datan kalot. They're very lightheaded, they don't have depth, and if given a chance of idleness, they'll become still worse. So that under no conditions is a man to leave, to allow his wife to lead an idle life. She must be occupied. The Gemara says there is one rabbi who says that a woman's purpose is not to do the work, but to provide satisfaction, physical satisfaction for the husband. To provide a husband with a woman of beauty, or to provide, to bring children into the world. And this is sufficient. Also, women generally, what are their desires? General desire of women is clothing, jewelry. A person who wants to bring the best, deepest satisfaction to his wife is to clothe her with beautiful clothing of linen. In those days, linen clothing was the best, and to buy her jewelry. At the same time, by the way, the Gemara says, a person has a daughter, and he wants to bring up this daughter so that she will be attractive in later life. The advice is to feed this daughter milk when she is young, because nothing can bring about a pure complexion in a girl like an abundance of milk drunk in her youth. This gives her that white, milky complexion. It's called milky complexion because it comes generally from milk. Actually, this item, when the Gemara speaks about giving milk to a daughter, there's much more depth to it than this. The Arizal says, and this of course is based on many statements in the Gemara, that a child, the future character of a child is determined from its infancy. And the most determining factor is the milk that a child drinks. Nowadays we have, again, women who are lazy, and today's custom is to feed a child formula. The olden days, old of course means until the recent past, the nature was, or desired to nurse a child. In nursing a child, this gave the child its characteristic tendencies for its future life. And we find, Arizal brings two cases, two sentences in Tehillim, which prove this point. There are two pesukim. One, King David said, Libi halal v'kirbi. My heart is empty. There is a corpse within my heart. That means the Yetzer Hara in my heart has been destroyed. It's dead. I killed it. I have no Yetzer Hara. My heart is pure. What are the first letters of those three words? Chalav, milk. Which means that a person's purity in future life is due to the origin in his infancy from whom he nursed. If he nursed from a woman who is kasher, a good woman, then it gives him a natural tendency to do good in later life. Another pasuk says, Cham libi bikirbi. My heart is filled with heat. Heat, of course, means the heated desire. The heart is filled with the heated desire to commit sins, filled with temptations. This pasuk too has the letters Chet Lamed Bet or Chalav, milk, as the first letters of those three words, which means that this too is determined by the milk, the origin of the milk that the child is nourished from. So that depending upon whom the child is nourished by, who nurses the child, this injects into the child this type of character, either a character of evil or a character of goodness and purity. That's why the Torah tells us, the Gemara says many times, that it is absolutely forbidden to hire a nurse, one to nurse the children. In those days, if the mother could not nurse the child, they would hire someone. You cannot hire a non-Jew to nurse a Jewish child. You should not hire even a Jewish woman who is not good, not pure, because the child will receive the characteristics of the person who is nursing him. The milk that is given by the mother, where does that milk come from? Even it says, Dam ne'ekad na'aseh chalav. The actual blood of the woman is changed, converted into milk. In the blood, you have the nefesh, the soul. You have the character. You have all the characteristics of that person. So if you have one with evil blood, that is converted into milk, and this is what the child absorbs. It goes into that child's blood. The child, Chas v'Shalom, has evil tendencies later on. If the origin is a woman who's a tzaddiket, that child will have the milk of its tzaddiket and will grow with that as its shoresh, as its root for future life. Now the Gemara says, in reference to this, that if a woman is divorced, her husband divorces her, and she has children, and she is interested in marrying someone else. She doesn't want to be bothered with her first husband's children and nursing them. The Gemara says that she is compelled to nurse that child as long as that child recognizes her. If the child is too young to recognize the mother, it makes no difference. But if the child is old enough already to recognize the mother, then you cannot change nurses for that child. At what age does an infant become able to recognize, to know who is the mother or who is nursing him? The Gemara says from the age of 50 days till 3 months, according to how sharp that child is. Even among infants, you find some that are better or more advanced mentally than others. So anywhere between the age of 50 days to 3 months, it's 50 to 90 days, depending upon the mentality of the child can already recognize who the actual mother is or who the actual nurse is. So if the child is past that age, the mother is not permitted to refuse to nurse that child and say, I will hire a nurse for it. The Gemara says that there was a case of one who came before Shmuel, and she refused to nurse the child, and the question was, is that child able to recognize the mother or not? So Shmuel said, let's test the child. He ordered the mother to stand in a line together with a number of other women and someone to carry the child along that line. And as they passed this woman, the mother, the child reached forward, tried to move forward towards this mother. The mother lowered her eyes ashamedly. Shmuel said to her, take your child. The child wants you, you take that child. The Gemara says that now, as far as the relation of husband and wife is concerned, We know that one of the outstanding factors in married life is the problem of money. In fact, the Gemara says that practically all arguments that come up in a house are due to questions of money. Whether to spend more for a certain item or whether to spend more generally. If not for the problem of money, there would be much more peace at home. Now, what if, this is now we have a case, this type of case. What if a man is a mule rider, which means that he works locally, in the community, in the city, and travels from one place to the next by mule, meaning that he travels very short distances. In other words, he's home every night. One who rides a mule is paid a low salary. He now has the opportunity to become a camel rider. It means he will travel a great distance out of town. He'll be paid much more money. But he'll be away from home for long periods of time, possibly for a month, more, up to 6 months. Is he allowed to change jobs without asking permission of his wife? Now there is an advantage and a disadvantage. Let's put it in a better perspective. Today, a person works where he gets to work by traveling in a subway, which means he commutes to a point where he'll be home every night. He now gets a job where he'll have to travel by plane out of town. He'll be away for nights or possibly weeks on end. Does he have to ask his wife for permission to switch jobs? The advantage is that he will now bring home much more money. She'll be able to live a life of comparative luxury. At the same time, she will not have the presence of her husband. She'll miss his presence, whatever benefit that is to her. Either she enjoys his company, or she enjoys having one to attack constantly. In either case, she'll lack his presence. The answer is that we know what a woman's answer is. We know what she wants. A woman would much rather have a husband with less luxury and less money than 10 times as much money, but to be separated from the husband. Therefore, he cannot assume this new position, though it pays much more, unless he receives direct permission from her. The only time that a person can leave his wife without permission is if he is a Talmid Chacham who goes to a different city to study Torah. The study of Torah, he does not need permission from his wife. But for business, he cannot leave town because of the potential additional earnings unless she first gives him permission. Even it says again that students who go to study Torah can leave their wives even for years without permission, because the study of Torah is something that any Jewish wife must be prepared for, to have her husband leave her for the sake of learning Torah, which is for her benefit too. She will have a husband who is a Talmid Chacham. The Gemara says that there's one case where one of the students of Rav, great rabbi who used to go to the yeshiva of Rav and come home every Erev Yom Kippur. He'd be home with his wife. One day, one Erev Kippur, he prolonged his study, he overstayed, and it was too late to leave for home. His wife, meanwhile, sitting at home, anticipating, waiting very anxiously for the arrival of her husband, sat at the door And every second she went to the door, now he's coming, now he's coming. Finally, it was too late. It turned dark. The disappointment, the heartbreak was so much that tears came from her eyes. In fact, a tear just dropped out of her eye because of this heartbreak. This rabbi was in yeshiva sitting on a bench. The bench, as soon as that tear dropped from her eye, the bench broke. He fell through, and he was killed. This was to show how Hashem takes the part of broken hearts. Because though he went there to study Torah, and here a poor woman who waited so patiently for her husband an entire year, and at the last moment she was so broken on it that a tear dropped from her eye. The gates of prayer are closed, but the gates of tears in heaven are always open. Hashem Amidi avenges for the tears of the innocent. The Gemara says that the son of Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Chia, he was one of the three greatest people at that time who wanted to pray to Mashiach to come. They had the power to bring Mashiach. He was the son-in-law of Rabbi Yanai. He went to Vienna, and every Friday he'd return home. Whenever he'd come back home, they would see a sheet of fire preceding him. This heavenly sheet of fire to show how great he was. One Erev Shabbat, he was delayed in the yeshiva, and when they didn't see the sheet of fire there, Rabbi Yanai said, it looks like he must have passed away. Otherwise, he wouldn't have missed coming home on time. The reason, of course, is that a Chacham, a Talmud Chacham, the Gemara says, is always home with his wife on Friday nights, if he's in the city, naturally. Now, when Yanai said this, the word of the tzadik, coming out, even though it said without intentions, but it must come true. When Yanai said he must have passed away, when those words left his mouth, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Chia's son, passed away at that moment. It was an accidental expression, but which had to come true, and Rabbi Yehuda passed away. The Gemara says, another case where Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Yehuda HaNasi, the chief rabbi of the Gemara, had a son, and he was very close to this Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia had a daughter, and they decided to make a match between the two, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi's son and Rabbi Chia's daughter. It came time to write the ketubah. Suddenly, Rabbi Chia's daughter passed away. She died suddenly just before the chuppah, just before the wedding. Rabbeinu HaKadosh said, this is a sign from heaven. Something was wrong. Heaven did not allow this match to take place. In other words, it wasn't fit. One family tree was not deserving of the other. They investigated the family background and found that Rabbeinu HaKadosh was a descendant of King David directly, and Rabbi Chia was a descendant of the brother of King David, which means that Rabbeinu HaKadosh was a direct royal family. Both came from the family of Yishai, the father of King David. But Rabbeinu HaKadosh directly from King David, and Rabbi Chia was not, and therefore they were not perfectly matched. By the way, this is what the Gemara says here. The Gemara Yerushalmi says just the opposite, that it was Rabbi Chia who came from the family of King David, his sons, and Rabbeinu HaKadosh came from the daughters of King David. It's the male side and the female side. The male side being superior, therefore the snatch could not go through. There's much more in reference to this brought in Sefer Kabbalah. But the point is that later, the Gemara pursues the topic more in a different vein. Finally, the Rabbeinu HaKadosh arranged a match with a different rabbi, Rabbi Yossi ben Zimna, and they agreed that once the match is made, it means they're engaged. Now, the Chatan should leave home for a period of 12 years to go to the yeshiva to study. This meant leave home before the wedding. Get married 12 years later. Now, while they were there at the house discussing this, the family of the bride paraded the bride in front of the chatan. They had to walk past him. So the chatan said, could we change that to 6 years instead of 12? They agreed to have it only 6 years, this absence, 6 years before the wedding. They did it a second time. So he said to them, could we perhaps have the wedding now, and then I'll go study for 12 years after the wedding? When he said it, he became very embarrassed. It sounded like he was over anxious to be married, to have this bride. It wasn't fit for a tzadik. So Rabbi Nachman said to his son, don't be ashamed. You are only saying that which we find in the words of Hashem. We find that the pasuk says, "Tivi emo betita emo," bring the Jews to Eretz Yisrael, and then Hashem said, "You'll build a Bet HaMikdash, and I will be with you." This is what was said first. Later it said, Hashem said, "No, we cannot wait for the wedding, this union to take place years later in Eretz Yisrael. Yasuli Mikdash, make me a temporary holy temple right hand of the bed, and I will rest with you." So we find that just like Hashem too said, Hashem was the Chatan, the Jews were the Kala, Hashem said, I don't want to wait until we get that many years later in Eretz Yisrael to rest, to be with you. I want to be with you now. You have the same characteristics, the same qualities. You too want to be married to your wife earlier rather than wait until later on. The result was that he was married, they made the chuppah, and then he went to the yeshiva. He stayed there for 12 years. When he came back, by this time, the fact that she had been away from him for over 10 years, this caused her to become sterile. She lost her fertility. A more than 10-year period can make a woman lose her fertility. Now she was sterile, she wasn't worth much as a wife. Rabbi Kadosh said, what do we do now? If we say he must give her a divorce, it would be a pity, a shame. This poor girl waited 12 years for nothing. If we say that don't divorce her, let him marry another wife for the sake of children, they'll say, what does this look like? This one is his wife, and this one is just an additional item in the house for beauty, physical beauty. Therefore, there's no other alternative but to have her return to health. Then Kadosh simply prayed, he solely to Hashem, and she was completely cured. This was the power of the tzadik emet. Gemara says that Rabbi Hananya ben Chachinoi once went to the wedding of, he attended the wedding of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Arizal. Then the time came to go to the yeshiva to study. Shimon ben Yochai Arizal said to him, wait for me till I'm through with the wedding, the 7 days of the chuppah, Shivat Yemei Mishter, 7 days of the feast, I'll go with you. Hananya said, I cannot wait. I must go to yeshiva and study. Then he left. He stayed there for 12 years. At the end of the 12 years, he came back home, and he found that the streets of the city had changed. There were changes there. They had put up the buildings. He couldn't find his way to his house. So he decided to find some means of detecting which one was his house and which one was his wife. He couldn't recognize his wife either. So he sat down near a yard somewhere, close to the river's edge, and he heard a girl being called the daughter of Chachinai. So he said, that must be from my family. So he followed her, watched where she went to, and he saw his wife sitting outside of the door. As he walked over to her, she raised her eyes, and she saw him and recognized him. The shock was so great, the shock and the happiness, sudden happiness of seeing her husband was so great that her heart just stopped beating. She passed away on the spot. This shock of joy. And Hananiah stood there and he said, Hashem, this poor woman waited for me for 12 years while I studied Torah. This is her reward. Please bring her back to life. And as the Gemara tells us, the rabbis and the Gemara all had this power. Tchiyat HaMeitim. He prayed for her and performed the miracle of Tchiyat HaMeitim. She was brought back to life. Midrash says, it's very important to note, extremely important, referring to this, could we say that since the rabbis of the Gemara had this power, they would use it wantonly, at will, at any time? Midrash says we find, for example, that Elisha Hanavi was given the blessing gift by Eliyahu Hanavi. He should be twice as great as Eliyahu Hanavi, meaning that just as Eliyahu Hanavi brought back to life one child, one human being, Elisha Hanavi could bring back two. So why didn't Elisha Hanavi immediately rush to the cemetery, kibud avaim, bring back his parents, his mother and father to life? He'd have them back. Who else would a person feel obligated to if he had that power? Why didn't he go to the cemetery and bring back his own parents to life? He'd have his parents back. He'd perform the greatest mitzvah of kibud avaim. He'd have them back again to continue performing that mitzvah. Why instead did he go to a strange woman's house, and this strange woman had a child who passed away, and he brought back this child to life? He used that gift, that power, for a strange woman's child rather than for his own children, rather than his own parents. The Dash answers in the first place, this shows again recognition, appreciation. Here was a woman who gave him hospitality. There's no greater appreciation necessary on the part of a person than a home where he's given hospitality, so that he owed her whatever was in his power to repay. Secondly, above all, these rabbis, these tzaddikim, who had this power, never abused it, never used it for their own self-gain. In this case, the Gemara tells us about Rabbi Hananiah and Hachinai, who would never abuse that power of Tchiyat HaMeitim for his own personal gain. He was a special case, where he dealt with a woman, may have been his wife. Still, it was a case of a woman who was so pure, such a holy tzaddik, who allowed her husband to leave home after the wedding, stay away for 12 years, to wait loyally and devotedly for his return, with anticipation, without complaint whatsoever. And when he returned, the joy that she was so overfilled with was more than she could take physically, and caused her to pass away. This, Rabbi Hananiah felt, was a case that though it was his wife, she deserved on her merits, not because of his being a tzaddik, not because he had the power or the choice. On her merits alone, he could find no greater person more deserving of Tchiyat HaMeitim than she was. And therefore, he solely prayed for her to be zochet to come back to be returned to life. And of course, his tefillah was answered. This being one of the powers that all the rabbis of the Gemara had, power of Tchiyat HaMeitim. Above all, the Arizal stresses that in the case of these tzaddikim, we must believe that Munah Shlema, in their greatness, in their holiness, in both a positive sense and a negative sense. Negative sense meaning to believe that these tzaddikim were pure, they had no bad of any kind, no sins of any kind. There was no such thing as a chet, chas v'shalom, to say that they had once committed sins. They were pure throughout. In a positive sense, the fact that they served Hashem thoroughly, continually throughout their lives, you must have Munah Shlema in these tzaddikim, who are all part of the tzaddik emet, the tzaddik yesod ha'olam. Yesod, the foundation of all other tzadikim. Tzadik Yesod Olam is the tree, other tzadikim are the branches of that tree. A person who has this emunah shlema in the Tzadik Yesod Olam becomes part of that tree too. He merges with that tree, becomes part of this tzaddik, and he is zocheh to the tiferet, the beauty and glory that awaits this tzaddik forever. We should be zocheh to have this emunah shlema and to see the tzaddik Yesod Olam with our eyes, see the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, Yan Bet HaMikdash, the true beauty of it, and Rabbi Menu. Amen. Amen. Continue the Shi'ur in Gemara. Gemara says Rabbi Nachman once also went to the yeshiva to study for a period of 12 years' time. After the 12 years were over, this was seemingly a given set time for students to study the yeshiva. They had their classes around for 12 years. After 12 years, he decided to return home. And he said, I don't want that there should happen to my wife what happened to the wife of Rabbi Hananya ben Hachinai. When he dropped in suddenly to see her, and the sudden shock caused her to pass away. So I won't shock her suddenly. I won't surprise her. I'll do it gradually. He went to the yeshiva, and he sent word to the house, a messenger, someone to tell her that her husband is home, he's coming home soon. This wouldn't be that difficult to take. While sitting in the yeshiva, a young man came in, Rabbi Oshia. Rabbi Oshia was his own son. He had no idea this was his son because when he left, his son was a child. This young man came over to him, and he sat down close to him. They started to discuss learning Torah, and Rabbi Nachman saw this young man was so sharp, such a great chacham, that he immediately felt brokenhearted. And he said, imagine if I had only stayed home. Instead of going to the yeshiva for 12 years, I could have had a son like him now. I would have been here. I would have taught my son Torah. I would have had a son who was such a great gaon. He felt very badly about this. Finally, he went home. He sat in his house. His wife was very happy to see him, of course. After being there for a while, his son came in, this same young man, Rabbi Oshia. Rabbi Nachman saw him, he jumped up. His wife said to him, since when does a father stand up for his son? Imagine his joy when he found this young man whom he so envied. He envied the father, and this man found it was his own son. It says that this is what King Solomon says. One is strong, but possibly weak. Two is stronger. One helps the other. The triple is something, a thread, where you have a combination of a rope of 3 threads combined, that cannot be torn easily. In other words, if you have 3 generations of Chachamim, Hamidei Chachamim, then the person is assured of having a steady family tree of learned people. Who was his 3 generations? Rabbi Oshia, the son, Rabbi Nachman, the father, the one who just come home, Rabbi Nachman's father, Rabbi Bisa. 3 generations of great Chachamim. Why are these 3 mentioned now, specifically? Because the fact that Rabbi Nachman was not home, how come that his son became so great? Because his own father, means his son's grandfather, adopted this son, cared for him, and taught him Torah. That's how he became so big a Chacham. Why did the grandfather take such pains of teaching his grandson? Because the Gemara tells us that anybody who teaches his grandson Torah receives credit as though he had stood at Mount Sinai and received the Torah from there. So big a mitzvah it is teaching grandson. Just as we have the mitzvah Vishinantam Levanecha, to teach your son Torah, we have an additional mitzvah for a grandfather to teach a grandson Torah. The reward for it is as though, the credit is as great as though he had stood at Mount Sinai and received the Torah there. Now we come to what's possibly known as the most famous story in Shas. Perhaps the most outstanding story in Shas, the story of Rabbi Akiva, his inception into Torah. Why is Rabbi Akiva's story so important? The lesson teaches any person who has had the misfortune of not being brought up in a family of Torah, parents who teach him Torah, who have not had the opportunity, whether it's financial or social assistance, to be able to become a Talmid Chacham, that all is not lost. There is still great hope for him. Rabbi Akiva is the classic example because Rabbi Akiva was the greatest of the rabbis of the Gemara, the only one who ever could be compared to Moshe Rabbeinu. The Gemara says, what was the beginning of Rabbi Akiva's life? How did Rabbi Akiva begin? Rabbi Akiva was the shepherd of Kalba Savua. Kalba Savua was one of the 3 wealthiest men in Yerushalmi. By wealthy we mean multi-millionaires. And as wealthy as he was, so great a tzadik he was, so charitable, so philanthropic. He had hired Rabbi Akiva to be his shepherd of his cattle. Rabbi Akiva at the time was comparatively illiterate. He knew how to read barely the Aleph Bet, he could read the Siddur, but he had no knowledge of Torah at all. He served as Kalba Savua's shepherd, and he was 40 years old at that time. The daughter of Kalba Savua, whose name was Rachel, saw Rabbi Akiva, and she recognized in him very pure and sincere tendencies. She could see this was a very delicate neshama. And she came to him and said, I am Kalba Savua's daughter, and I am offering you myself as a bride, as a wife, on condition that you will leave immediately after the Chupah wedding and go to the yeshiva to study Torah. Rabbi Akiva immediately accepted. Marry so wonderful a woman, the daughter of the richest man in Yerushalmi, plus the fact that her whole hashkafa, her whole outlook was not to marry a man who was wealthy or a man who had special standing in the community, but to marry one with the sole intention of seeing that he learns Torah. Rabbi Akiva agreed, and they were married secretly. And as soon as her father found out, he disinherited her and fired Rabbi Akiva from his position and made sure that no one would give him any financial assistance. His daughter was left penniless, and so they had nothing, no money of any kind. They were forced to live in a barn. And all they had in the barn was some old straw on which they could lay. Rabbi Akiva felt badly only for his wife's sake, nothing to offer her. How poor they were. Here she had been living in a comparative castle, the greatest luxury imaginable, and now she's got to live with clothes that are becoming tattered, and without any food, without any furniture of any kind. The only bed they had was a little bit of straw. Suddenly there was a knock on the barn door. Rabbi Akiva opened it. There was an old man standing there. This old man, the Gemara says, was Eliyahu Hanavi, who came disguised. Rabbi Akiva asked him what he wanted. He said, "I'm very poor. I want you to help me." Rabbi Akiva smiled and said, "I'd gladly do it, but I have nothing. I haven't got a penny to give you. Literally, if I had 1 penny, I'd give it to you. If I had a piece of bread, I'd share it with you. But I have no penny and no bread." The old man said, "I'm not asking for that. I'm asking only for a little bit of straw so I could lie down." He said, "That I can give you, gladly." He took some of the straw and gave it to this old man. The old man took it and disappeared. He says, why did this happen? To sort of encourage Rabbi Akiva and his wife. Encourage them to show them that they are not the poorest people out. Here's someone who's even poorer than you are who doesn't have even a straw to lie on. Then the Gemara says that Rabbi Akiva said to his wife, "If I would have money, you're so wonderful what you're doing, what the sacrifice you made. If I'd have money, I would buy you a gold crown." The women have different types of jewelry, and they wear sort of a crown, a band around their hair, around the head. The band of gold is called Ir Shel Yerushalmi. It's called a Jerusalem gold crown. If I had money, I'd buy it for you. She said, "I don't care about that. All I want is that you keep your word. Go to the yeshiva and study." Rabbi Akiva left. He went to the yeshiva of Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol, who was his main rabbi, by Rabbi Yeshua. There he studied 12 years, as was customary. At the end of the 12 years, he was ready to go back. This time, the Gemara says, there are 2 opinions in the Gemara. One place it says that Akiva came back alone. He met an Adanim. The book says that Akiva came back with 12,000 students. 12,000 students is so great, a tzadik, a rabbi, he became, he developed to such an extent. He came back to Yerushalmi, but he came back without fanfare. He was not yet recognized as so great a leader. When he came back, he came through the back end of the barn, and as he was about to enter the barn, he heard his wife talking to someone. Before going in, he decided to eavesdrop, or he couldn't help eavesdropping and hearing what the conversation was about. He was curious who it was. He heard the voice of a man there. He recognized the voice that of an evil man, known evil man in Yerushalmi. He spoke to his wife and said, "Why do you stay with, you're married to your husband? He's deserted you. What good is it to be married to one whom you don't see? Why don't you go back to your father? Tell him that you will accept the divorce from Rabbi Akiva. He'll take you back into his house after he's broken-hearted, because when he disinherited you, he wasn't that bad-hearted. Out of the heat of anger for what you did, he made a vow, a neder, not to give you 1 cent of his belongings, of his wealth. And therefore, he cannot help you with 1 penny. All these years, do you think your father is happy seeing you suffer like this? At best, you take inside the washing of old clothes from some neighbors who have pity on you. Look at how you're dressed now, torn clothes. Why don't you go back to your father? Break off this marriage. Husband is gone for 12 full years. Is that a life?" And Akiva waited breathlessly to hear a reply. She said to this man, "My husband, Rabbi Akiva, has been gone 12 years. For my part, I'd be very happy and satisfied if he stayed away an additional 12 years, as long as he is studying Torah." Rabbi Akiva did not enter the barn. He silently moved off, returned to the yeshiva where he had been studying, and stayed there for 12 more years. Total absence of 24 years from his wife. But at the end of these 24 years, Rabbi Akiva had now become the Rabbi Akiva, the chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael, the greatest tzadik alive, the famous leader of the Jews, rabbi of all the Jews, so famed that now on his return to Yerushalmi, all Yerushalmi came forth to greet Rabbi Akiva, who was coming in a special parade leading 24,000 rabbis as his students. There were now 24,000 great rabbis who were his students. And the city turned out to give kavod to so great a tzaddik. The leader of the welcoming committee was the leading member of the city, Kalba Savua, who was his father-in-law. Kalba Savua had no inkling that this Rabbi Akiva who was coming was really his son-in-law. But what he was anxious to do, he wanted to see this great chacham, to ask him if he could somehow solve the problem for him by removing this vow that he had made not to give his daughter any financial aid. He felt so hurt all these years of seeing his daughter suffer. He thought perhaps Rabbi Akiva would be able to find a loophole through which he'd be able to remove this vow. It's called Hatarat Neder. And he waited until Rabbi Akiva came, and then he approached Rabbi Akiva. He gave him the proper kavod, the proper honor that was due the chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael. And he said, I have a problem. I wonder if you could help me. My problem is that I once made a vow, many years ago, a vow not to give 1 penny of my property to my daughter. The reason was that I didn't want her to marry an Haaretz at the time, an illiterate. She married him against my will, and that's why I made the vow. So anyway, legally, this vow can be removed. Akiva said we have to have a reason to show that the vow itself was an error. If we can prove the vow was an error, then we can remove the vow. Now let me ask you just one question. If you would have known then that your son-in-law would eventually become a rabbi like myself, for example, would you have made the vow? Kalba Savua looked at Chas v'Shalom. Rabbi like you, if you become 1,000, 1,000,000th as great as you, I've never made the vow either. But he could never become anything. And Akiva said, well, how do you do, father-in-law? Kalba Savua just about fainted on the spot. And, of course, he asked Mechila from Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva removed the vow, and the Kalba Savua gave Rabbi Akiva half of all his wealth, which, of course, made Rabbi Akiva extremely wealthy. Now, continuing along on this parade, riding on his coach, the streets were lined with people. Thousands upon thousands of people came to see, to feast their eyes, to be zocheh, to look at this tzaddik. That's no small item. It is so great. Rabbi Akiva had a student. One of his students, later years, was Rabbi Meir Balanes. Rabbi Meir Balanes had a student, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, chief rabbi of the Gemara, the one who compiled the Mishnayot. Rabbi Yehuda once made a statement that said, the reason I am so great is because I was zocheh to see my rabbi, Rabbi Meir Balanes, once to see his back. And if I would have seen his face, imagine how great I would have been. It shows how important it is to be zocheh to see the face or the eyes of a tzaddik. So here, people came forward to see, to gaze upon the holy countenance of Rabbi Akiva. Among those who filled the streets was Rabbi Akiva's wife. Came forward to look at this tzadik. And there are two opinions again as to what she thought. One opinion says that she knew this was her husband. The other says that she did not know. Now, her friends told her, how do you expect to go look at this tzadik the way you're dressed? Torn clothes, it's a shame for you to go out and be seen by him. And she replied, he is so great a tzaddik that surely he will not embarrass me. This was, according to the opinion of the Gemara, that she did not know was her husband. Second opinion says she knew, and she replied, a tzaddik can recognize his animal. He can recognize the soul of his animal, meaning that I am only his servant, like an animal is, and he will recognize me anywhere, even though he's been away for 24 years, and he'll take me close to himself. Of that I am certain. The Gemara says that as the Akiva's coach passed along the street, his wife Rachel ran forward to Rabbi Akiva, and she fell forward at his feet, and she started to kiss his feet, kiss the feet of the tzaddik. The students who were running close to him, acting as sort of bodyguards, rushed to push her away. Rabbi Akiva yelled out and stopped them. He said, don't dare, because you see this vast amount of Torah that I have learned, this vast amount that I have taught, all that I have learned, and all that I have taught, and all that you have learned, the entire credit is hers. It is her credit only because of her was I zocher to go out and study all these years, to go out and teach all these years, and to come back as I am. It's all due to the credit of my wife Rachel. The Gemara says that Rabbi Akiva had a daughter. This daughter, of course, was extremely fine, brought up the same as the mother, and in order to select a chatan for her, he picked out his best student at that time. It was not actually a student, it was sort of half student and half chaver, friend. His name was Ben Azai. Ben Azai was one of the four who visited heaven together with Rabbi Akiva. Of course, Ben Azai was one of those four who refused to leave heaven, and he passed away while in heaven. But he gave Ben Azai his daughter for a wife. And the Gemara says that like mother, like daughter. This is where the statement comes from. The exact words, like mother, like daughter. Ki'ima, kibita. Just as the mother had done for Rabbi Akiva, so did the daughter do for Ben Azai. She agreed to let him go off to study Torah for an unlimited period of time. The question is, of course, the Rosenfeld asked the question that we find before mentioned when the rabbi spoke to Ben Azai, and they said to him, there are some who tedush very nicely, they lecture very nicely, and there are some who perform mitzvot very nicely. There are some who do both. You lecture nicely because you speak about the great mitzvah of getting married and having children, yet you do not fulfill this mitzvah. But as I answered, true, but what can I do? Nafshi chashka Torah. My soul craves Torah so much, I am married to Torah. I cannot take time out to be married. This was his answer, and the Shulchan says that he was justified. Every person must get married unless he is that great as shakdan. Shakdan means diligent in the study of Torah without stop, without pause. Like Ben Azai, then and only then is he excused. No one who can compare to Ben Azai. No rabbi in the Gemara is called a shakdan, diligent in study as Ben Azai was. However, we see from there, Ben Azai said, the other said that he was not married. How do we find here the fact that, stating here that he was married? Because of what answers, that it is true that he was not married. They became engaged. After the engagement, Menazai left and went to study Torah, but never consummated this marriage. But the Akila's daughter was so pure, like her mother, that she was willing to let her husband, or her intended husband, to go off and study Torah, and to live with that knowledge that she has even an intended husband who would be that pure in the study of Torah. The other possible answer is that he did get married, and afterwards he had left her. In any event, of course, he did not have any children. That's why it's called Ben Azai, but not his full name. His full name was Rabbi Shimon Ben Azai. Because he did not have any children, and therefore he's called only Ben Azai, not by his own name. Yemena says that the Ravah was one of the much later rabbis in Yemena. He had a son, Rav Yosef, and he too was about to get married. And he got married with the intention of going to study Torah for 6 years, return after 6 years. At the end of 3 years, on Erev Kippur, he decided to come back to his home. Though the 6 years was not up, he decided to visit his home just for this day, but he made sure to come back Erev Kippur, just to prove that he's not coming back because he has a physical desire for his wife. Because the law is that on Kippur, the night of Kippur, husband and wife must be separated as though she is in Idah. Now this was conclusive proof that his intentions were not for that sake at all. Despite this, the fact that he came home 3 years before the time so angered his father, Ravah, that Ravah took a stick, he came running towards him, and he said, "How do you dare to come back? In the middle of learning, you're reminding yourself of your wife, of your dove." This word dove was put in, injected to show that he knew that his son Rav Yosef was pure. Because the Gemara says that of all the animals and birds that exist, no animal or bird is pure in the sense that it has its mate. Animals are not husband and wife. Each animal is free, roams about, and has no set mate. The same thing with birds. The only one is the dove. The dove adheres, sticks to its own mate, and refuses to mate with any other but its very own. The dove is the only loyal, let's say, loyally wedded bird of all the animals or birds. That's why the Knesset Yisrael, the Jewish nation, as a symbol is called the dove. The dove is the symbol of peace too, and that it's pure in this respect. That said, you reminded yourself of your wife, your dove, meaning that there is purity here, but still, how do you come to think about your wife when you're supposed to be studying Torah? And the argument became so intense that this was just before Kippur, they had to eat the last meal. They became so involved in the argument that both of them, father and son, both missed eating that last meal. They had to go into Kippur hungry without the last meal. Now, speaking about Ravah, the Gemara says that these two, Ravah and Abaye, were the two most famous later rabbis of the Gemara, among the Amoraim. You find them throughout the entire Shas, the entire Talmud mentioned more often than any other rabbis in the Gemara. Ravah was married to the daughter of Rav Chisda, very great tzadik. Abaye passed away before Ravah. Now, the rule is that a person who is poor comes before the Bet Din, the Hebrew court, the chief rabbi, and asks for financial assistance or for food. A wife of Abaye, whose name was Choma, came to the yeshiva of Ravah, the chief rabbi and asked him to give her food. So he said, all right, he wrote out an order that she's to receive from the regular funds this amount of food. She said, no, I want you to add to this wine. I want a regular supply of wine. Rabbi said, how do you come to ask for wine? I recall knowing Abaye. I know that Abaye did not drink wine. How come that you drank wine, or that you want wine? You're accustomed to it. She answered, well, let me tell you, Abaye would give me wine in cups as large as this. She held her arm out to show, and as she did, the sleeve fell back, and the lower part of her arm was revealed. This Chomah was such beauty. Beauty generally coincides with the word radiance. A beauty shone so that when her arm was revealed, the room was filled with brightness. The fact that her arm became exposed. When Rabbi saw this, he jumped up and he ran home. He came to his wife, the daughter of Chassidut, and he spoke to her. Looked at her and spoke to her. The reason was that so that he should not have the thought that any other woman, the possible thought, was thinking about great tzaddikim, not to allow the possible thought, tiniest iota of thought of a different woman. He went to look at his wife and to know that he's satisfied with his wife only, not to think of the slightest a different woman. But his wife suspected something. She asked, how come suddenly you came home? Tell me, who was in the Bet Din today? Who was in the court today? Who was there just now? And he said the wife, the widow of Abaye, came to ask for food. Rabbi's wife picked up a heavy block, metal wall, and she went to the court. She started to swing at Abaye's wife. She started to chase her. She yelled, you killed 3 husbands. Now you're coming to this city to find a 4th one to kill him? She drove her out of the city. Of course, it's important to note that Abaye's wife, true that she had been married 3 times prior to this, to 3 great rabbis. Abaye was the 3rd one. And it tells about Abaye's problem, should he marry her or not. He was advised not to, because the Unit says that a woman who was married twice, when both husbands die, that woman is called a killer. Not deliberately, of course, but her mazal is that the husbands die. A person should not marry a woman whose 2 husbands have died. Abaye did, because there is a safek, there's a doubt, there's a machloket, whether this applies to a woman who's had 2 husbands die, then she's called a killer, or it takes 3. Of course, in his doubt, he decided to marry her, and of course the result was that he did pass away. Now, she herself, of course, wasn't a tzadik. It wasn't physically her fault, it was just that mazal. But Rabbi's wife was anxious to see that she was withdrawn from that city, that no 4th person should fall into this bad mazal. And this could have even applied to Rabbi himself, because in those days it was customary to marry more than 1 wife. This is why she removed her presence from that city. The Gemara says that Yochanan ben Zakkai was one of the greatest students of Hillel the Elder. Hillel has a kid. Yochanan ben Zakkai was the rabbi of Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol, who was in turn the rabbi of Rabbi Akiva. Yochanan ben Zakkai lived at the time of the Churban Bet HaMikdash, when the Roman Empire attacked Israel, attacked Jerusalem, time with Aspasianus, the first king, and ultimately his nephew, King Titus, Shmuel, who broke into Jerusalem, destroyed the Bet HaMikdash, and drove the Jews into exile, to Galut, to this day. Yochanan Zakkai was the one who influenced King Aspasionis to let the rabbis remain alive, that the Torah should continue to flourish. At that time, the Gemara says, when the Romans were besieging the city of Yerushalmi, there were three very wealthy people in the city. One was Kalba Savua, the father-in-law of Yaakov. The second was Makdimo ben Gulion. Makdimo ben Gulion was a very holy person for whom the Gemara says Makdimo means the sun shone especially for him. But one day the sun had set, and because of his tefillah, the sun rose up again. He was also the second wealthy person, and the third was Ben Kisudek. These three were so wealthy that they could supply nourishment, necessities for the countless millions of people living in Yerushalmi at that time. That's how wealthy they were. Of course, the youth at that time, the impetuous youth, fighting youth of Yerushalmi, did not want to make peace with the Romans. They went against the advice of Yochanan Zakkai. In order to expedite war, they set fire to the warehouses of these three wealthy men, and this, of course, brought the war to its climax and the downfall of Yerushalmi. Now, after the Churban, the Gemara says sometime later that Yochanan Zakkai was riding on a mule. He was riding on a mule leaving Yerushalmi, and the students were walking along behind him. Suddenly he spied a woman who was standing among the animals of the Arabs. Arab animals, bending down between these Arab animals among the dirt, picking out just drops of oats, the lowest type of food, animal food, but selecting them from among the dirt. Which meant that she was that poor, she had no food to eat. She was that desperate, she would take these oats, these dirty oats, home to try to wash them and to make some food out of them. When this woman saw Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, she quickly covered her head in respect. She came before him, stood before him, and she said to him, Rabbi, please feed me, give me food. Yochanan Zakkai asked her, whose daughter are you? In other words, you look familiar to me. She said, I am the daughter of Makdimo ben Gulion, one of those three multi-millionaires. So Yochanan Zakkai asked her, well, where is all that money your father had? Where did it go to? She answered, there's a saying in Yerushalmi. 3 words, Melach, Mamon, Chaser. Salt, money, gone. Which means, if you want to salt your money, just as you salt meat, keep it, to be able to stay, you want to salt your money. The money should remain with you. You shouldn't lose it. And chaser, get rid of some of it. How? By giving tzedakah. If you give tzedakah, you ensure that the money you have left will remain with you. If you fail to give tzedakah, that money is not salted, it could dissipate, it could disappear. That's what happened to my father's money. Of course, there was not enough tzedakah given, money was gone, completely. Yochanan Zakkai asked her, what about your father-in-law's money? He was wealthy too. Where is it? She said, that money was mixed together with my father's money, and one had the bad mazal of getting lost and dragged along the other one with it. Then she said, Rabbi, do you remember, you were at my wedding, you signed my ketubah, a marriage contract. You recall the marriage contract? Yochanan Zakkai turned and said to his students, I recall very clearly, when I signed that contract, I read in that contract it said that the father of the bride gives cash, 1,000,000 gold dinarim as a gift to the couple. In addition to the amount that the Chatan brought in from his father as the requirements of the ketubah, to support of the ketubah. That's how wealthy she was at the time of her wedding. Yochanan the Zakkai then burst out crying, and he said how wonderful the Jews are when they fulfill the command of Hashem. They do the will of Hashem, and they rise to such a height that no nation in the world could rule over them or overpower them in the slightest. But when they turn away from Hashem, Hashem in turn hands them over to the lowest form of nation. Even the lowest nation of the Goyim rules over them. And not only that, even the animals of those nations rule over them. Imagine this tzadik now has to degrade herself to go among the dirty Arab animals. Their dirt, to go pick drops and boats for herself. You may ask, how could we say that? How can we even think, suspect it, that Timur ben Gurion, who was so holy and tzadik, that for his sake, the sun shone especially, just as the sun shone for Yehoshua, the sun shone for Moshe Rabbeinu, so did the sun shine especially prolonged for Timur ben Gurion. These are the only three people for whom this miracle occurred. One who was so great, one who was so great to the mitzvah tzedakah. How can we say that he lost his money because he did not give tzedakah? The Yemina answers, of course he did give tzedakah. You know that when he went out of his home to the Beit Midrash, they had special carpets laid out for him, expensive carpets. And when he came to the Beit Midrash, he left those carpets behind. The poor would come and roll those carpets up with whatever was in them and take that. This was just one of his acts for giving charity to the poor. And the amounts he gave were tremendous. How can we say he didn't give any tzedakah? He lost money because of lack of tzedakah. The man answers two reasons. One, because he gave tzedakah for the sake of kavod. He wanted to show how much he's giving. Second, even if it was not for the sake of kavod, the fact remains that when you place a burden on a camel, you measure off how much that camel can carry. And that's the weight you put on a camel. You don't put a 5,000-pound weight on a camel that can carry 1,000 pounds, and you don't put a 50-pound weight on a camel that can carry 500 pounds. You put the weight in ratio to the power and strength of the camel. Now, every person must carry his burden, his weight. A rich person is expected to give more to that guy than a poor person. He's got to carry his weight. So if Akil Ben Gurion gave $100,000 to tzedakah, it may be very much for an ordinary person. It may be far to reach for a regular person. But for his class, his status, for his wealth, that was not sufficient. To judge a person in ratio to his wealth, how much he was supposed to give, this was not sufficient. That's why he was punished, and he lost all his money. We don't judge by the amount that a person gave, but by the percentage. We say ma'aser, we say a chomesh. It's the percentage of the earnings and wealth of a person that he's required to give tzedakah. If he fails to give that percentage, he has not fulfilled the mitzvah tzedakah. The Yemina says that when speaking about those poor who come before the Jewish courts, if an orphan male and an orphan female, boy and girl, comes to the court, Hebrew court, they ask to be fed, to be provided with food, the law is that if there is enough to give to only one of them, you must give it to the girl first. If there's any left, you can give it to the boy. If not, the boy is out of luck. Why does the girl come first? Because it is not proper for a girl to go around from door to door begging. A boy or a man can do that. A girl is not tzniut, it's not modesty. Therefore, since a man can go begging from door to door, you must first provide for the girl often, and then if there's any left over, give it to the boy. If not, let him go begging. Same thing too if we have to marry off an orphan who doesn't have parents. The Bet Din wants to contribute the money for it. That orphan can marry them off. If they find a case of a boy or a girl, two of them, not to each other, but two separate cases, we have to provide money for one or the other, and the girl comes first, because the embarrassment of the girl in not being able to get married, have to delay the wedding because of lack of funds, is much greater than the embarrassment of the boy. Or the embarrassment of the girl having to find a chatan is much greater than the boy's. The girl cannot go out to seek it. It's excluding the ability of a boy. The girl is passive. And that's why in this case, both for food and for marrying off, the girl comes first. In either event, we must strive to provide for those who are in need. The tzedakah is so great that the Gemara says Yerushalmi, which has been destroyed, will be redeemed again, rebuilt again, and the chut of that tzedakah, and Mashiach Amen, Amen.